Hello and welcome to Gardening at 58 North. So in this video I'd like to introduce you to my Clivia collection here, and I'll be talking about what I need to do to restore this back to its former glory. So basically these plants here, they've not been growing in a good location for the last few years. These have been actually living in my parents' polytunnel, where it's far too cold during the winter and it's far too bright and sunny during the summer. So these plants are native to South Africa. They actually grow as a ground cover plant under forest or under shrubland. So these don't like direct sunshine. They don't mind cooler temperatures, but they certainly can't take temperatures near freezing. And the main thing is they don't like direct sunshine because of the canopy that they're used to growing under. So because these were in a polytunnel, it was high humidity, which again isn't a very South African thing. Normally it's quite an arid climate in South Africa. So it was high humidity, very high light levels, and then during the winter it was far too cold for them. So because of that, they're looking quite bleached. The yellow effect on some of these leaves, that's because too much sunshine has bleached them, and so they've got this horrible yellow colour. The other problem they've had is they've been in just normal garden soil without anything to improve it, and it's quite a poor sandy soil, so they've kind of suffered. They've not been fed for a few years now. I think they've been sitting for about 5 or 6 years in these pots. They've never really grown, and very rarely have they flowered. So these originally came from one single plant that I had years ago. About 20 years ago I had one. I'll put a picture in now if I can find the picture from all those years ago when it was in flower. It did actually look quite good. What was then done is they started to clump, so they were separated into individual pots, and that's what you can see here. There was also one of them was grown from seed that the Clivia once produced. So one of these is seed grown, the rest is divided from the original clump. So what I'm going to do in this video is to restore them back to a good condition. I'll be taking them out of the pots, removing all the soil as much as I can. It'll be quite difficult because they normally have quite succulent roots. They look like they should be growing from a bulb, but Clivias don't actually have bulbs, or at least this species doesn't. The most common one is Minata, that's the one that most people grow. That doesn't actually have a bulb, it just has succulent roots. So I need to be careful not to snap the roots, because that's where all the energy and all the nutrients is stored in them. It doesn't get stored in the bulb. So I need to be careful with the roots not to break them, especially as they are quite brittle. And I need to remove as much of this old soil as I can, and I'll be putting in a new mix of compost which will be much better suited to these plants. So this is the new mix of compost I'll be using. It does look a bit wet and sodden at the moment. That's just because my compost has been stored outside and it's quite wet at the moment. But Clivia, they do quite well in a loam-based compost, and I've tried to recreate the conditions that they would have in South Africa. So I've got some loam-based compost. I've mixed it with some multi-purpose because they do like a slightly richer mix than just pure loam-based compost, because they grow in the forest floor, so there is quite a bit of organic matter in there. Although being a dry, arid environment, the organic matter isn't as high as some forest floors, and because they're from a semi-arid environment, I've added quite a lot of perlite as well, just to make sure it's free draining. These plants, if their roots stay wet for too long, they are quite susceptible to rot, and they're quite tolerant of drought as well. So they're quite a hard houseplant to kill. Even though they are a bit susceptible to root rot, they can tolerate it better than most succulents and most arid plants, and also because of the succulent roots they're very tolerant of drought. So they really are quite a hardy houseplant, but I'll need to add a bit of drainage in there just to make sure they grow at their best. So this is the compost mix I'll be using, and I'll just go ahead now and I'll start loosening the roots and trying to get rid of all the old soil. I'm just going to do it in a hollow in my garden where I'm hoping to level out the soil. So one of the other problems these have had, I forgot to mention, is actually they were covered in weeds, the pots. So I have weeded these a couple of months ago. The weeds have started to come back again, but these have been completely smothered from time to time with weeds, and that's something else that's been really hampering them. So they look quite sickly now, and they're really not doing well, but I hope with this treatment they should really recover nicely, and we should get some nice flowers probably next year. This year, because they flower in spring, they're not going to have much time to recover over winter, but I'm hoping by spring in 2022 we should have some good flowers again. So that's the plants now potted up. So the soil they were potted in before was free draining. It was a sandy soil, it's quite poor, but it meant that it was free draining and that the roots didn't suffer. So the roots were actually quite good. Also, something that happens with a lot of plants is if you don't feed them enough, what tends to happen is don't put on much growth at the top, but the roots still grow quite well. because the roots are still searching and trying to find more nutrition. So the root systems are pretty good. Because of that, now that they're in a much better compost, much richer, more nutrition, they'll quickly absorb all that nutrients and water through the well-established root systems, and then they can put on a lot of new growth, which will be nice dark green colour. So all this existing growth, which is quite light green and not looking too healthy, that won't improve at all. That will just slowly die off, but there'll be a lot of new growth coming out from the centre of the rosettes, and that'll be a really nice dark green colour. It should look a lot nicer. Clivia naturally have really dark green leaves. You can see this one is a bit closer to what they should look like. So they should come through nice and dark glossy green. Now with Clivia, they tend to flower in spring, but what you need is a cooler environment to encourage them to flower. These need to know when it's winter and then when it's spring. So when you grow them in your house, sometimes they struggle. They don't know if it's winter or not because it's too warm. I'm going to be having these in a conservatory which gets down to about 12 degrees during the night. That should be cold enough over the winter time that this will realise it's winter, and it then should flower in spring. With these ones though, I'm not expecting many flowers. I have found in the past that Clivia can flower even when they're very small, so these might well flower in spring, but I'm expecting the flowers to be quite small because they're very weak plants. They don't have much energy, so they're not going to be able to put on a good display. But what these should now do is put on a lot of growth over the summer. I'm going to have them in a shady position, probably underneath my frangipani and my rubber plant and my avocado tree, because these don't like too much sun, so I need to protect them from the worst of the sun. So I'll have them in a shaded area in the conservatory, but they'll still be getting plenty of indirect light. These like bright indirect light, and if they get direct sunlight they do tend to go yellow. But deep shade, they can tolerate deep shade, but Clivia grow very slowly in deep shade, so it's best to give them a bright light just away from direct light. That way you get good growth, but you keep the nice dark green leaves. So that's all for this video, and I'll see you probably in spring with the next update. These by then should be putting on either nice dark green foliage, or they should be putting on a small flowering display.